Part 4. Beijing and Tianjin, China. Chapter 1. "How are you feeling?" Alex asked as he stood over the old combat medic. Dellen was fastening medical gels to old but sterilized syringes. "Tired. I never slept too well on birds. I like to keep my mind busy, or I get sick." "Mikhail got a pretty good drop on you back there." "Come off it, kid," Dellen replied, more weary than angry. "I'm fine." Alex took a seat on the cold metal floor next to the piles the doctor was using to make provisions. "Not fine enough to talk to me directly. You might want people to think you're a bitter old man, but you care about these people. Maybe more than I do." Dellen held up one of his hands that was punctured and bleeding in several spots. "Definitely more than you do. Why else should I be making stims for a bunch of Americans?" the doctor said with faint humor, letting a smile come to his face. "If anyone can give me a clear picture about what happened 10 years ago, it's you." Dallin let out a long sigh as he set aside his equipment. He'd been waiting for this conversation, but he didn't expect it to come now. He realized then that Elias must have spoken to Alex. "A lot of people died. More than Jack would have you believe. If Janet knew what happened, she might have killed him already. We don't talk about them. We knew them all before the war, and we dragged them into that conflict. Jack was the worst of us all. They trusted who he used to be, not what he had become." "Which was?" Alex asked. Dellen stared down at his hands for a moment, thinking back, maybe, and shook his head. "A man that was willing to sacrifice every facet of himself and those around him if it meant getting the job done. We survivors figured that one out too late." "How many members of your team were there?" Alex pressed. "There were 10 of us when we struck at Morrison. We had more, people we had served with, and recruits off the streets. Also, the streets kids were too green to shoot a rifle straight. Jack did his best, but Morrison's numbers cut out the weak quicker than we ever could. He started sending out kids in war paint, having them dress like raiders. I'm sure you've heard of the Black Skulls and the Veil Snakes. I never saw them myself. Any scrap of news we got made them out to be rapists and psychopaths. Probably what they're saying about us right now," Alex replied as he picked up some of the fasteners and went to work helping Dellen. "They were more than that. Jack put me in charge of training them and giving them assignments. I had them pulling raids on convoys, doing demolitions work on building construction. The good ones even pulled troop ambushes that would make you proud." "They were your troops," Alex said. "Indeed they were. Jack had a hand in helping to train them, but they were mine to lead. Maybe if he had gotten to know them like I did, he wouldn't have thrown them away in the attack." "Elias said you thought I was following the same road." "Seemed that way back in London. Of course, I didn't realize you were there for more than just me." Alex turned his head, spotting Layla sitting across from Mikhail, trying to make conversation. "The world's not a giving place, Doc. Might have been the only time she'd ever see her home again. Wouldn't you take a chance to make a wish come true for someone you cared for?" "I would, and that's why I'm here. You just can't stop with one person if you have any hope of getting everyone through," Dellen said. Alex held in a breath. He knew that would be impossible. "Do you ever wonder if they died because you weren't ready? Because the odds were too high?" Alex asked. "The only thing I know for sure is that we were all ready to die, just not for each other," Dellen replied. Alex leaned forward and stared into Dellen's eyes. "I'm doing what I can for every member of this team, but I can't protect us from every threat. A stray bullet bouncing off a wall, or back at 7i a flash went off right by me. If it had been a stinger, I'd be another gruesome stain on that research station's floor." Alex finished fastening gel to the syringe. "My point is, regardless of how much these people like me, it won't save us all." The doctor hung his head. "The difference is caring enough to try, Alex. You've got a good sense of combat, but when shit gets gritty, people start acting on their own. Good leaders make their squad devoted to getting each other through. And when someone falls, they become that much more determined, not filled with fear or resentment. Well, we're all getting a lot of practice." Alex reached for another fastener and gel pack. Agreed, Dellen replied, reaching back into the pile. Well, that was the thing. See, I'm sitting in the getaway vehicle and I bring it through the back. Motherfucker comes towards my door with his gun raised. Tommy had his chair spun sideways from the cockpit controls. He had his feet kicked up on a console and was spitting his version of the Jerusalem heist for Elias. You purposely stopped for him, and he made like he was going to kill you? Elias asked as he leaned on the cockpit door. It wasn't without a motive, that's for damn sure. I ended up opening the door on him and putting a bullet in his brain. When I found out what that car part was worth, it all made sense. Easier to take all the loot and split it, right? Tommy let a sly grin slide across his face, sunglasses hiding the glimmer in his eyes. And you ended up selling it? No, actually. I held on to it as a memory from that job. First time anyone ever tried to stab me in the back. It's happened a lot since then, but I've always come out on top. You don't seem like a man who'd be sentimental about that sort of thing. Tommy tilted his head and let his glasses slide forward so Elias could see his eyes. I am when that thing is beneficial to my needs. I installed it in the BMW after finding its value. So yeah, it was a trophy, but a useful one. I don't imagine you had any other trips as eventful as that one in Jerusalem, Eli asked. Hell no. Security down there in the quarters makes Morrison's orange-blue diamond pass card system look like nonsense. You know they didn't get hit in the war? The defense force just kept on rolling. Tommy set his shades back over his eyes and tilted his head back. An order would be a welcome change. For once, I'd like to take in my surroundings without getting shot at, Elias said, reaching for a cigarette. Tommy spun back around to the controls. That's why I fly, or drive. Plenty of free time to watch, or think, or sleep. All the control, none of the bullets. Mostly. Plenty of time to plot, maybe, Elias said under his breath. Good chatting with you, Tommy. He turned for the exit and made for the hold. Elias didn't buy Tommy's bullshit story for a minute. If the old man was worried about him, then Elias knew he had reason to be worried as well. He took a glance around the chopper. It was amazing that 11 people could walk about the makeshift carrier and hardly notice each other. Still, this floating home was better than the holes in the ground back home. Maybe not as nice as the warm beds at Alonso's, but the safety of being in the air evened out his discomfort. As he walked through the main hold, he saw Alex sitting with Dellen. Elias knew after he relayed the doctor's message, the two would eventually speak. He could only hope that whatever the doctor said would sink in. These escapades were only getting more dangerous, and Eli didn't like the idea of working with people he'd read about only from Jack's lists. While he continued his daydreaming, he felt a hand go to his shoulder. Elias spun around quickly, startled at first. Little jumpy? Janet asked, flashing him a smile. No, you just caught me in my head, that's all, Elias replied, embracing her. Exciting, she said sarcastically. Take a look at this. Janet reached into one of her bandoliers, pulling from it a cloth and small bottle. What's this? Grease remover, for your gun. Janet began to reach for his holster. Elias took a step back. Whoa, wait a minute, what if I don't want it clean? Janet gave him a puzzled look. Rarely, if ever, did Elias become defensive in the brief time they had known each other. Let's skip me asking you why you want the burn marks on there and get to the part where you tell me about the stadium, she said coolly, placing the bottle and rag back in her bandolier. Elias looked away from her. Nothing good about what happened there. Eli. He let out a long sigh. He knew Janet was stubborn. Of all the people on this bird, she wasn't going to give up. Well, you know about the riots, the fires. We were right in the thick of it. Lured in like everybody else. Yankee Stadium, 27. Fuck, Alex, they're shooting, Elias yelled, pulling his friend to the ground. They were surrounded by people packed in like tinned fish. He heard the thumping of bullets smashing into bodies and hoped his wouldn't be next. We need to get guns and get out, Alex yelled over the gunfire. Eli responded with a nod. When the gunfire stopped, the two began pushing through the center of the crowd. There were men, women, and children either screaming or rushing the stands, some more successful than others. More gunfire could be heard as they tried to get near an exit, but this was coming from the epicenter. You smell that? Elias yelled. Alex gave him a nod and looked towards the upper stands. Several of the Marines were no longer shooting but dumping canisters of fuel onto the floor and seats. The fire immediately engulfed the seating sections, torching Marines too gung-ho to give up the bloodlust that overtook them. The heat given off by the flames was crashing into the refugees hard. Alex and Elias both tied their shirts over their heads to shield their eyes from the heat and their lungs from the smoke. Some of the Marines were still firing pot shots down into the crowd. Elias saw the body of a boy, who couldn't have been more than 11, flung to the ground by a spray of bullets. He fed his fear and disgust into pushing harder past the other refugees. Alex had found a rifle and was using the stock to help move people out of his way. Elias didn't know whether it was the smoke, the smell of death, or experiencing him and his friend pushing by women and children that made him sick. Alex wasn't cruel with his weapon, but he did force some to the ground just to save themselves. The guilt built up the more Elias looked at who he was knocking out of his way to freedom. The exit from the park into the Colosseum was covered in blood and bodies. He could see other refugees tripping and slipping over them. The duo ran by the thinning crowd and towards the exit stairs when a section of metal hangars came down near them. "Place is coming down too fast," Elias yelled. Alex kept sprinting, "and I don't plan on being crushed." The two slid down the stairs railing, past more broken bodies that had failed their escape. Once at the bottom of the stairs, they made out in a dead sprint for the exit and ran for the adjacent building. "We'll see what they do now," Alex said, as they watched Marine teams slowly go in and out of the burning structure, until they finally rolled away. Alex decided they would stay the night and pick through the ruins in the morning. With no incidents during the night, the pair awoke to see smoke still rising from Yankee Stadium. Though much of it had collapsed on itself, there were still ways to get inside or around the smoldering places. They shed their jackets as they grew closer. It was still warm enough to power through the winter cold. "Not sure this is the best idea, man," Elias said. He was still unarmed. Alex had the rifle from the previous night. "Don't have a choice. We need to get you a new gun since they took ours last night." Alex tilted his head towards the entrance. Elias shrugged as they started off from the molten metal building. Burnt bodies and plastic was the prevalent smell throughout the ruins. Elias thought he could still smell fuel, maybe remaining canisters, but saw nothing as he walked the veranda. "They must have coated this place beforehand," Alex stated. "Either that or wired it with explosives, but I don't remember hearing anything go off. There was a lot of noise last night. Between the gunfire and all the screaming, maybe we didn't hear it." It was hard for the two to avoid the long trail of the deceased who had failed to make it out. Their bodies half charred, some crushed and others still with exposed bone or riddled with bullets. If there were other survivors, they would have been smart enough to not return here. Elias could not imagine anyone escaping this smokehouse would ever come back on their own volition, except Alex. "Weapons would have been up in the stands," Alex said, pointing to the stairs the Marines had used the night before. "Look above the stairs," Eli replied. Molten metal was seeping down slowly. "Stands are on the field now." Alex grimaced as he turned towards one of the field entrances. "How many people, you think?" he asked as he brought a hand to his face, rubbing his forehead. "That field was packed. It was still packed when we got back to the veranda." "Ah, fuck." Alex let out a long sigh. "There could still be weapons out there." "Do you really want to see 1,000 burnt corpses covered by a molten tombstone?" "I haven't been breathing their smell the last 20 minutes for nothing, Eli. Come on." Alex began to jog out towards the grounds. Elias had been correct. Much of the metal structuring from the stands had caved into the field, even though the veranda had stayed intact. The fires that still burned would likely change that fact in the coming hours. Most of the bodies were under refuse, though closer to the interior, past the molten metal. There were others who had died from the smoke, heat, or firefight. Alex slung his rifle across his back and began traversing the walkable parts of the field. Elias followed, being careful to step over the bodies. Alex didn't seem to mind stepping on a wrist or ankle like they were fall leaves. More than anything, Elias hated the sound of snapping bones. "Alex, come on, man." "What? I told you we need..." No, you asshole. Look at your boots. They were stained with blood. Alex looked up at his friend like he was crazy. Look, we're already stealing from the dead. Can we at least show them a little respect? Elias asked. Alex shook his head and kept walking. Let's see how much respect you show when Morrison sends another platoon in here. Elias spat off to the side and kept in step with Alex, dealing with the sound of wet crunches all along the way. Alex only stopped when he found a pile of bodies with guns attached to them. Must have been some of the rioters, Alex said as he kneeled next to them. 4 of them were carrying easy-to-smuggle small arms. A 5th carried a rifle. Gutsy Marine to come all the way down into the fray, Elias said, giving the body a kick, then reaching for the dead man's ammunition. Hold on to these for me, Alex, he continued as he lobbed the clips over to his friend. I need to take a leak. I'll be right back. Alex nodded and went back to looting the bodies, while Elias jogged off back towards the veranda. Being that close to so many corpses was too much for Elias's empty, dry-heaving stomach. And while the veranda wasn't much better, there was fresh air that was beginning to filter through. He really did have to piss, but he wanted to find a closet or side room to do it in. To him, pissing around near corpses of people who had been in his situation was disrespectful. He found a closet, but struggled to open it. Elias reared back and kicked in the handle. The weight on the door was so heavy it came down almost on top of him, if not for a quick sidestep. More bodies, though it was more bodies with weapons. The closet looked like hot gobs of metal had come down and burned everything inside. He wanted to stop looking, but he couldn't. It was horrifying to think of a family or group of friends experiencing their last moments melting alive. Elias understood now why Alex wanted Morrison dead. He was about to walk away when he saw the gleam of a pistol on one of the corpses. He kneeled near the body and pulled the dark yet slick-looking .45 from its holster and held it up to the light. He could tell the darkness was from the fire, but no soot coated his hands as he tried to wipe it away. Elias assumed its original color to be some shade of silver, but polished often. It seemed in good condition apart from the carbon scarring. He placed it inside his pants and began to look for another room to take a piss in. Present day. We left after I got back to Alex. There wasn't much ammo there, but that's where I found this damn gun. Christ, Eli, I didn't know it was that bad, Janet replied. I dream about that night. Not about the ambush itself, but what Alex and I had to do to get out. Terror forced us to commit our own acts of terror. I wish we had both died that night. That would have been easier than living with what we did. Janet had nothing to say to that. She couldn't imagine pushing the innocent out of her way to save her own skin. It was a desperate situation, she knew, but did self-preservation overtake empathy? She decided not to question it. She hadn't been there, and likely would have reacted the same way. I won't pretend to understand, but I won't judge you either. All this, why you're doing it, makes more sense now. Yeah, Eli replied, looking down at his gun. You sure you don't want me to clean it up? That's all in the past. You and Alex are different people now, Janet asked. Elias twirled the pistol around his finger. Nah. With everything we have left to do, it'll just get dirty again. Fine, Janet said, pulling her body closer to his. But when we're done? Elias smiled and gave her a nod. Kid looks in better shape, if you ask me. And I'd be angry too, Otto said as he did pull-ups on one of the crossbars. Jack and he were conversing in one of the bunk rooms. I wanted him angry at me, not this other asshole. Christ, that's what I get for snooping into old world rumors. Shit. The kid could never be mad at you. He looks up to you too much, or at least his idea of you. Otto dropped from the crossbar, landing with a thud. What's that supposed to mean? Jack reached into his coat. It means before you started drinking that shit. Before you burned every bridge and connection we had. And before you went on a gamble to gather a group of rogues, Otto shot back. Jack creased his eyes at him and knocked back a long pull from his flask. "What are we, Otto?" the old man asked. "We're soldiers, and a little more. What we're doing here, it didn't work out well last time." "I'd say we're doing a decent job at it. They all want Morrison dead for one reason or another, don't they?" "Maybe. But is that enough?" Otto asked as he cracked his knuckles. "It's all we have," Jack replied. "They're skilled, more skilled than the last group we used. How do you feel about our chances?" Otto reached over and pulled the flask out of Jack's hands, then tilted it up and drained the rest of it. "Morrison's dead, no matter what. If I'm nothing more than a husk of meat because of it, then that's fine by me." Jack could have been talking to himself in the mirror. "Dell is trying to convince Alex that he'll be able to walk through this with everyone intact," the old man said. "He knows that isn't possible. He lived it. It doesn't hurt to let him believe that. Alex wants Morrison dead as badly as we do. You can see it in his eyes when he fights," Otto replied. Jack let a rare, non-vindictive smile come across his face. "I know what you mean. That's why he was the perfect choice. He has a lot of rage, enough to dare to stand against impossible odds. Not to mention trusting in a man he hardly knows, and an alcoholic to boot. Can't blame Dell for checking on his mental state," Otto added. "If he knew, Otto, he might have killed me before this field trip even started. What are you complaining about anyway? It gets you what you want." "I wouldn't want 10 years worth of revenge if we had done this shit right the first time. You pulled the trigger too damn soon." Otto slightly raised his voice, standing over the smaller man. "It was the best plan. There was no way I was going to remove Dillon from our squad so he could play hero with the rest of the bait." "That's your problem, Jack. You used them as bait. You thought of them as bait, and without someone to command them, that's exactly what they became. And what happened? They got fucking slaughtered. Without that team to keep the Marines distracted, we got fucked over in the tower. You locked the cage on 10 years of my life. You're responsible for Janet growing up without a father, and you're responsible for destroying a friendship with Dell that you forged in all those battles that don't matter anymore." Otto took a step back and drew in a deep breath. "You might think it's easy for us all to focus on your goal, old man, but you had 10 years alone and free to plan again. I spent mine as a reaction to your best plan. I'd hoped seeing you again would be telling. I wanted to know if you had learned anything from the first fuck-up, or if you were still ready to throw it all away again." "And what do you believe now?" Jack asked as Otto made his way for the door. The convict looked down at the many tattoos and scars that covered his arms. Some he attained for the fallen, other because they had fallen around him. "You'll leave us all changed, one way or another." Jack watched the door slam closed. He looked down at his flask. The convict had dropped back into his hands. It had been indented, crushed by Otto's fingers. "Asshole," he said to himself as he spun on the cap. The old man would get more booze later. For now, he needed to go through what few contacts he had remaining in his network. Nayala was at the top of the list, but she was now an unknown. The remainder of his list was full of names with lines through them. Contacts, former soldiers, mercenaries, and spies. Most of them had been made 10 years prior. They were either dead, disappeared, or retired somewhere they could quietly survive. He scanned the black booklet for anyone in China, but Talia, or rather, her mother's name, was the only one listed. Jack had heard a rumor of war brewing in the area. However, like the pre-war, China had kept itself hidden from the rest of the world. He assumed it was a border war with the Indian people who were attempting to integrate into China. That meant the bulk of the military forces would soon be in southern China, trying to keep the immigrants out. He wondered if Talia would even be in Beijing, if that were the case. The rumors he had heard of Talia herself, though, was that she wielded a blade and was as agile as the bullets that were fired at her. At one time, he might have believed those rumors to be embellished, but after seeing a man like Koslov, the old man no longer knew what to expect. The world had hidden so many secrets that the war had brought to life. Why not add a blade-wielding warrior and a world of firearms to the mix? What Jack could be certain of was that his ideas had led to the creation of this unlikely band, a group full of talents that would have made the team 10 years ago seem like FNGs. The old man laid the book off to the side and searched around for a crate underneath one of his bunks. When he found it, he pulled it from under his cot and cracked the lid open. Inside, there were several varying bottles of alcohol. He snatched up one that had already been opened and poured it into his flask, and then put his nose to the bottle, breathing it in deeply. "Scotch," he said aloud, before putting the bottle back in the crate and taking a short pull from his old flask. The old man let the strong taste pervade his lips and the tip of his tongue. Like any poison, it was harsh, bitter, and effective. Jack knew these traits were shared with the man he sought to murder, a man whose personality he had to emulate if he was to better understand the chaotic and erratic thought processes that were often followed by brutality. As he knocked back a pull, Otto's words replayed in his mind. "You had 10 years alone and free to plan again. I spent mine as a reaction to your best plan." Otto would never know the guilt Jack felt. It was because he lost his team that he funneled so much into getting them back. That's what Jack wanted to believe, but the more he thought about his old friend's words or the past, reality sank in. Building a nightclub as a base, using Morrison's resources, an endless supply of booze he let influence his decisions. All those nights he put off the planning. He threw back another pull. Sleeping with women too many years younger than him, promising shit he would never give. The early murders from what was the start of Blood Boil. The shame of setting his patches and military honors aside for the gray and black of Morrison's Marines after the bombs. Another pull. Twisting a boy who had nothing but respect for him into the jaded personage of self-hatred, manipulating a woman he had once loved dearly into giving him information, and into an affair with the boy. Letting Otto rot for 10 years while he ate steaks, drank scotch, and slept in warm beds. Destroying his relationship with Nellen, who he wished he could still call his best friend. Now he had a new team of young faces, all of them ready to be thrown into the fire. All of them ready for him to sacrifice over again. He thought about Alex and his young love. Success or failure, the young man's life would mirror his own. Nothing mattered to the old man but his revenge for watching children, women, and families being burned alive in the fires. Seeing Eric gunned down in front of him. Jack knew the day they failed was the day he had to put emotion aside. Everything had been planned out meticulously, and everything had clicked into place. Jack would not let arrogance stop him again. The flask seemed light as he lifted it towards his lips. Jack realized it was his head as his body fell sideways to the floor. As the room began to darken for him, the old man spat out a single word. "Scotch." "What's your suit made from?" Layla asked. She and Mikhail were using the center discussion table as a workbench while they cleaned their weapons. "The exact polymers as listed in its project schematics are unknown to me. However, its outer layers have a smooth gel-like quality when moving through tight spaces. Conversely, the gel quality hardens when impacted by high-velocity projectiles." Layla was puzzled by the way Mikhail talked. It was as if she were listening to a computer, reading from an old-world book. "You're saying that it's bulletproof, too?" she asked, setting her SMG down and cocking her head sideways. "Yes, although it is less reliable in thinner areas, such as the wrists and calves," Mikhail added. "Valuable info," a new voice said. They both turned to see Brandon standing behind them. Layla shuddered to think how long he was just waiting there. "I'd probably just aim for those eyes," the sniper continued. "Brandon, really?" Layla quipped. If the men at your base were the product of your training, then I find your chances to be remarkably low, the Shadow answered. Brandon moved to get into Mikhail's face. The Russian did not react. Tyler, watching from afar, ran over and put himself between the two. Come on, knock this shit off, he said. It was more about forcing Brandon back. Tyler could smell the familiar scent of booze on the sniper's breath. Need help? Layla asked as she came over and grabbed one of Brandon's arms. Hey, Alex, she yelled as Alex and Dylan moved across the hold. What's going on? Alex asked as Brandon, quickly realizing the trouble, stopped his struggling. Lieutenant Duigu intends to engage in hand-to-hand combat with me. Mikhail deadpanned over Layla's shoulders. He's been drinking, Tyler said as he let the sniper go. Alex crossed his arms and waved the rest of them off. Layla and Mikhail turned back to their guns. Tyler moved to join them and gave Alex a nod if he needed any more aid. Alex nodded back before pointing towards the hall for Duigu. Tyler watched until they disappeared behind the hall before he turned to Mikhail. Ain't he a fun guy? Tyler said with a smile. Mikhail continued to clean his weapon, but Layla replied for him. Not so fun when you're taking care of the drunks, huh? Yeah, very funny, Tyler replied, though he was still looking at Mikhail, who had yet to pay him any mind. Oh, you got a name, friend. I was hiding out on the bird before we had a chance to meet. Mikhail looked up at him slowly and shuddered his golden irises. Whoa! Tyler pushed himself back from the table, nearly tripping on his own feet. Layla burst out laughing from the far side of the table. That was Mikhail Koslov. A pleasure. He didn't turn from his work. As Tyler pulled himself up, he gave Layla a confused look. It's a long story, she started. What made you think that was a smart idea? What are we all doing here? Alex yelled. He could see by Brandon's face he didn't care to be lectured by a man 16 years his younger. The sniper was still hiding behind his wintry weather gear, heavy jacket, padded fatigues, boots, and his beard was full but well kept. I don't need to hear a speech from a street rat still wet behind his ears. You gonna sit here and lecture me on how to handle the loss of 20 good men? He yelled back. The response made Alex hot. You don't know me or the shit I saw back in New Purgatory. Don't think you understand me because I let those murders slide. You want your revenge, the same revenge I want, then you will let Koslov live to see Morrison dead. The sniper did not reply to that. I know you were put through hell during Jack's first attempt. I'm going to make sure none of us go through that same hell, but you need to work with me and the rest of this team. Otherwise, we might as well crash this bird into the nearest ocean, Alex continued. If he survives the mission, I'm going to unload the minute Morrison is dead, the sniper replied. You'll do what you have to do when this mission is over. I thought we had that all straight. Right now I need to know if you can keep away from him until this shit is over, Alex questioned. Yeah, but now you need to understand something. I've been where you are. The old man is going to do to you what he did to me and everyone else. And right now you're an extension of him. I don't need your plans or your rules. I go where I need to go on a mission to keep everyone safe, Brandon cut back. That's what we need you here for. Just leave Mikhail out of it for now. Got it? Alex replied. Brandon looked away from the darkened hallway and towards the lighter main bay. If it wasn't for our shared goal, I'd be putting you in my crosshairs, Velasco. Brandon spat. 20 soldiers, and you're letting him walk amongst us like he's an old ally. Chew on that for a while. Of all of us, you shouldn't be playing the if game, Brandon, Alex said, giving off a deathly stare as the sniper moved back into the bay. In the brief time of getting to know him, Alex didn't care much for Brandon. As good of a sniper, perhaps even a leader as he wore his trauma openly. Alex didn't have the heart to tell him, were the situation different, he'd have killed Mikhail himself for offing those soldiers. But now wasn't the time. He needed control. As Alex brought a hand to his face to rub his temples, he also realized he needed to sleep. The trip to Beijing would be short, and he wanted to be rested before they hit the ground.